We'll call to order the study session for the Planning Commission, January 21st. Carl, do you want to lead us through?
Absolutely. So I didn't prepare a formal presentation for tonight. Just going with the memo that was provided to Planning Commission. But the purpose of tonight is to review the draft work plan for 2026, and happy to discuss some of the things that staff feels like we accomplished, and what I feel was a very successful 2025. But always interested if Planning Commission agrees. I think this will ultimately go to City Council as part of their strategic plan, and then present with the chair, usually later in either February or March, to review the work plan, see what they feel is necessary on there. But just looking back at the last year, I think the collaboration with CSAB and the input, especially as we look at furthering our sustainability goals with the Energy Preferred Building Code, and Planning Commission's input in that process, and just working through, I know it is a multi-year with shifts and twists with federal law and constitutional law and the Supreme Court, and other things, but ultimately I think that would not have been a successful effort without your involvement. And I think the other tailor to that is the resilient landscaping standards that were then also adopted in that same process as we look to remove redundant aspects of sustainability, and put those tools into the right toolbox in the building code and take them out of the zoning code. At the same time, we were able to address our water efficiency goals as well as our wildfire resiliency goals as well. And there's going to be additional building code provisions, especially with the state map. The fire department and building are leading that, and planning is definitely involved. But if we're going to require trees, let's not regret where we plant them later. I think is the key there. Yes.
Question. The years are beginning to run together, but when did we do the electric preferred with the sustainability group? I was thinking it was last spring, but was it spring of 24?
So absolutely. So that was ultimately adopted as part of the building code adoptions in July of 2025. That effort, however, I believe started in 2022, 2023, originally with the original, questions about should we, ban natural gas utilities altogether, appliances. Ultimately, the Ninth Circuit, which is usually a little bit more liberal than some of the others, said that that's not an option. Therefore, but it was ultimately adopted last summer.
I think that's worth noting specifically as part of what we did with the sustainability folks.
Just the duration?
Well, given the duration, and I mean, it seems to me a significant decision and moving ahead, I think, for the city.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I could definitely add some additional details as to, why that accomplishment mattered as much as it did, given I think your point on duration is a great one. We did work on the state-driven zoning code amendments with tactical changes to our zoning code in relation to the state law. And I think specifically, I think the biggest one, and we're working with our first use of it, is the residential occupancy standards. So no longer enforcing based on familial basis, but so no more than 4 unrelated persons. No longer relying on that, but if you have more than 4 adults, then we're confirming that you meet the health and safety standards with proper egress, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, and I think that's a lot easier than what we might say is a show your papers approach on the other one, which I think is not staff's preference. Show us your smoke detectors is much easier. The comprehensive plan update, I think that is an effort that will have another study session at your next meeting. But just again, all of the work that went into your input to get those iterative drafts to the state where they're at, and ultimately, with your, comfort level after this next study session, we'll be looking to start that adoption process with public hearings. But I think it's certainly a big effort to read, revise, and edit that level of draft and comment on it. And I think your efforts have been nothing less than invaluable to get that draft to the point that it's at.
So on this one, and then I see it's also in the next section as well about comprehensive plan adoption. I just want to make sure it stresses that we want to get it right and not fast necessarily. I understand, there's some expectations that we will have it adopted in early 2026, and I think that's fine. I think we can say that, but I also just want to make it very clear to council and the public that we are spending the time that it's needed to be taken evaluating this. And if it does need to take another study session, I think we should, have that opportunity to. It may not, but I don't necessarily want to set expectations that, we're going to push this through without the appropriate review and maybe feedback as well.
Absolutely, and I can definitely make that clear. And I think my favorite analogy when dealing with comprehensive plans is the plane analogy. We're up in the air currently. We're no longer fixing the wings as we're flying the plane, but at the same time, this is an important document that sets the vision for this community, and we want to make sure that that is a smooth landing. And so, if we, after this study session, if we anticipate turbulence, well, that's a reason to stay up in the air.
Thank you.
Initiate a transportation demand management plan. So staff has been working with a consultant. This isn't something that's necessarily come, through planning commission, although you did see some changes to the parking chapter that requires a TDM plan if a property were to reduce their parking requirements. So that was adopted, and then we'll work on the voluntary TDM program. We're working with a consultant currently, and that will ultimately come up to planning commission. So we've been working kind of on the staff level with the consultant, but ultimately that would likely be coming to planning commission, and is certainly MTAP as that goes forward. And then just, planning commission, we did, your recommendation was in 2024, but the changes and overhaul of chapter 1810 and then chapter 1828 was adopted by council early this year, or early last year in 2025. So I think that's just another effort. And then we've been working to improve our communications as well. So looking at the hubs, communication of how we communicate notice and other things. So trying to make our code more digestible, and we're working actively on our website to make some improvements, some significant improvements in that realm. But I think just overall, how do we communicate process? How do we engage the public with development in this community? I think, we've tried to make that, more approachable, both from process, but also the code and regulation. So. And then ultimately the six goals that we,
Can we
please
stop there for a minute and just see, are there other things that we on the commission think are, we ought to include as work done and either things accomplished or in process, or that we worked and sweated over, that should be mentioned as part of the review for 25 accomplishments and so on?
Is it important to have a record of the number of applicants that came before the commission, and is that a record that the planning commission typically publicizes, and would that be helpful for the community to know about?
Sort of a workload.
A KPI.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
We could certainly do that, and I think it's also, how many did not come to the board, I think is another rounding point
Sure.
in that.
Sure.
Of, how many form zone site plans, ultimately were, approved without, being called out, even though they do get that public notice piece. I think that's something that we can certainly look to add to that work plan. for the narrative.
Good idea.
Yeah, and I know it's under our 2026 goals, and I think we started the work in 2025, the evaluating of the form-based code, and I think, you know, maybe starting a little bit, talking about that, because I think we did do a lot of work, you know, building a foundation for what we want to see when we do our evaluation, but I think, you know, we did take several study sessions, at least 2 to 3, to talk specifically about the form-based code, kind of areas of improvement, just some analysis, and I think there's certainly a much deeper dive that we need to do. But we did start that work in 2025.
Yep. And what we do in 26 will be in large part based on having done that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should have had my notepad out
You're fine.
earlier. I assumed maybe just it was perfect, no changes, but, you know.
Anything else from thoughts or ideas?
Specific to last year.
To the, to the 25. Okay.
So, you know, to dovetail into that, you know, one of the main points of conversation is going to be those form-based code amendments. As we look to no more kind of large-scale phases, we're out of the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of zoning code amendments, and now looking at tactical changes. And I think some of those, you know, as we look to potentially introduce either new form types, you know, like the 2 cottage cluster, or to allow for certain form types in the different overlays, you know, in kind of that borrowing strategy. That will come with a lot of engagement and, you know, a lot of additional work, but there's also known, you know, fixes to the zoning code that we're looking to do, the half story and those other things. And I think we want to make sure, because a lot of those can get into very technical aspects, and, you know, just giving the time to work through those. But if there's any questions on this one, or you know, how it's described to City Council and the Planning Commission.
Yeah, I would say that we did start to kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the analysis of what had been approved, and like what is actually built, and what does that look like, and was that the intent? I think we need to continue that conversation. I think a lot of the, you know, homes that are being built are much larger and maybe not quite fitting in with the neighborhood as well as we had hoped originally. And is there anything we can do to further refine the existing form types to maybe kind of make that a little bit more in line with what's already in the neighborhood? I think that would potentially help with, you know, affordability. You know, that's all relative, but you know, I think we talked about those 3 large homes that were put in and kind of by the golf course. You know, is that truly what we're looking for? Is that really achieving like the intent of the form zone code? You know, they're all selling for like $2 million. Is that really what we want in Golden? So I think it's just maybe looking at different.
I do.
Some people do, sure. I don't know if it's for everyone. So just, yeah, I mean, I think it's worth a further conversation.
Do you think like adding a little, just, you know, a continued review of lessons learned and review and refine the code?
Yeah, always.
A sentence there would be worthwhile in that one.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we're constantly, as we review these cases, finding things like, oh, like, we didn't really mean for this to be this way. So it might just be worth kind of having a continual conversation about it.
Okay. A good old repeat offender. So the Golden Terrace manufactured home park rezoning. So This will ultimately, we anticipate will come to Planning Commission this year. We have a draft document that's being reviewed by the community members and then going ultimately to a neighborhood meeting, which would be required with any rezoning prior to that formal application. And so we have made a lot of progress with the property owner and engaging the community. And this will ultimately become a quasi-judicial hearing in front of Planning Commission and then City Council with that rezoning to PUD and then that PUD amendment for that section that already is zone PUD. But ultimately, we are, with a sturdy knocking on wood, anticipating this to come to a fruition this year.
What is February 12th?
I also have the same question.
That is the night of the neighborhood meeting, and
Okay.
apparently that sentence was not finished. So February 12th is the neighborhood meeting.
Okay.
Okay. And with that, the comprehensive plan adoption, I purposefully just added, this is when we anticipate, but we didn't add any firm dates. And that's with anticipation. So, you have a study session, and ultimately it is ready for adoption when it's ready. So, if it needs to bake longer, on the plane, then we can, make sure that happens. But, again, thank you for all the work that you've done to get that draft to the place where it's at.
And I looked on Guiding Golden today, is there, for the comprehensive plan, the full, most recent draft?
So we are getting that back from the graphic designer, I think either tomorrow or Friday, and we'll get that up as soon as we have that. There were some tweaks to some language refinement there, but then also, just the substance. We will publish it as soon as we have it back from the graphic designer.
So it's what's gonna be published in the next couple of days is what we'll talk about when we meet on the 4th.
Correct.
So could you send us an email when it gets posted?
Yes, I
So
will.
that then we know that it's the one that we actually should look at.
Yes, I will do that.
Okay.
I think the other thought, we had kind of a working draft with also a Word doc for certain things. We felt that it was better for Planning Commission to see a more finalized product than, kind of a piece in pieces. So, but yes, I will make sure that email is sent as soon as it is up to the public, if not sooner. I think this is a topic that, was presented to you by a grad student. So we have a requirement for a commercial floor area when you're proposing residential in a commercial zone, so C1, C2, our CMU, commercial mixed use zones. If you want to do residential, then 25% of that has to be commercial floor area, or it could be 100% affordable housing units, like you saw on 817 14th Street, or you go to Planning Commission for a special use permit. I think this is work that was analyzed by the grad student, and it's kind of taking that next formal step with that to look and say, can we maybe adjust some of that commercial floor area in exchange for affordable dwelling units? And I think the Cole over on Colfax is a good example where they determined and kind of provided that market analysis to say we can't fill 25% commercial area. Just the market can't handle that level of retail or office, and got a PUD amendment to still do a mixed use development, but to reduce that commercial area. The idea is, could they have maybe a pathway to do that in exchange for some affordable units to reduce that commercial area? So that's a topic that we're looking forward to coming back to you with, and I think that pairs actually well with the form-based code changes potentially. because some of our, in those commercial zones, you have form types, either residential or the mixed-use building type, that's allowed in those, and yet they're kind of not built for that 25%, 75% mix. And so there's some opportunity, could you reduce that in exchange if you're developing those types? And it just gets a little bit into that mix between use-based code, right, chapter 1828, and then the form-based code, and how can we have things that fit the community needs in a number of ways, either by characteristics or by those uses or by delivering, community beneficial affordable units. So I think that's just a conversation that we're looking forward to have, and I think it pairs well with some of those other zoning code changes potentially.
So what do you envision that process would look like? We'd have some specific examples to look at for approval or for recommendation to city council, or that we use those to try to develop some guidelines, potentially maybe as far as regulations, but at least guidelines. I'm just trying to think about what that would look like.
Yes, absolutely. So the way staff envisioned this, first, we would like city council to bless this work plan with this item on it. Council might say, neat idea, yeah, it's been floated in the past. We are not in support, this doesn't have, our blessing to continue that work, right? So we're kind of on waiting to see if council agrees with this being on that work plan. And if they say no, maybe in another year, or, not at all, that's their prerogative, and, staff would not spend the resources on it. If they do say, yeah, this is a valuable conversation for planning commission to work on, then staff anticipates starting with a legal memo to help provide some of those options as you just laid out. What are some things that we look at from a process perspective, right? What are those ratios for if you deliver this number of units, how much relief from the commercial side do you get, right? Are there geographic considerations or other places where, what's the criteria that you might review this under? Rather than framing out red lines to the code or building out those regulations, that's what the legal memo would really outline, is, thinking of it as framing a house, right? Here's all the different framing techniques and how the design you might consider as this, moves forward, and then based on feedback from planning commission and the city council, we would then draft those regulations, from that, and actually build out those regs to say, this is what we heard, here's how that would function, in more of a regulatory framework rather than legal memorandum. And so that's the process that staff anticipates, but again, we would like to see, does this stay on that work plan?
I think, related to this, but also a number of other items on our list, I'd really like to see that housing needs assessment before we kind of go too far down into some of these things, because I think we need to understand, like, what are we trying to achieve here?
And we did get actually the draft addendum to the needs assessment, and that really, the addendum is focused on the additional pieces that were called for with the HB 24-174, and some of it's, displacement risk analysis, accessible unit analysis. So that would be an addendum rather than a full-on new H&A housing needs assessment. But we'll definitely provide that with planning commission with the old, or the 2022 H&A plus the addendum for your considerations.
I was gonna ask a similar question. In the councils of the city's strategic plan from last year, there was something called, I think, the Healthy Housing Project. Is that the same thing as the needs assessment, or is that something else?
I think they can safely be categorized as related, but not necessarily the same. And I think the healthy housing, also looked at potentially, maintenance things. And I would defer ultimately to Lauren McKinney and Thriving Communities. So related, but not necessarily, directly
And it would
tied.
cover that information would be kind of boiled up into our conversations here, because it's tangential, but not specifically related to our purview.
Correct, yeah, it's not really I think the healthy housing, wasn't really owned by a zoning or planning process. You know, I think it roped into a different realm.
Okay, thank you.
Do we as a group wanna get those 22 housing report plus the updates, or at least the links for those or whatever, at the same time that we know, that we get the information about the comprehensive plan? I mean,
Yeah.
that was really part of it, I mean,
Absolutely, yeah. Agreed.
part of the same conversation or so on, so.
The H&A is a rather meaty document. I'm happy to send the link to that. You know, it really, if you want that only with the addendum, we can wait. Or, you know, the addendum's about 18 pages, the H&A is about 200. So, you know, if you want to get a head start on that, I'm just happy to, or I can send the link and you can just wait to open it if you want, you know, both documents at the same time. But happy to send the H&A.
Thank you.
So, as I mentioned, you know, staff is actively working on overhauling our portion of the website. So the city adopted the new website about a year ago, and you know, that came with a revision of how we communicated. So rather than going to, oh, that's the community development department, it was refocused on what are the services that people might be trying to get to. So short-term rentals, even though that's in community development, there you go just straight to there in that topic. Excuse me. With that, there were changes to some of the, you know, how much content did you have? How many pages did you have? You know, I think we're at a place where, especially as we communicate our development applications, our formatting standards, our requirements, so we get more consistent applications. That helps staff, that also helps planning commission when the tables look the same, so that way, even though they're very different applications, some of these things can be apples to apples, right? You know, we are working to, like I said, make the code more digestible, more approachable along with process. And so I think, you know, given that, we also would like planning commission's work and feedback with those efforts. You know, sometimes it makes sense to us planners. That's because we live this, you know, this is our jobs. And getting that, you know, community perspective from you, I think is something that, you know, would be valuable as we continue to work with communications and, you know, here's the changes we made, here's how we think it's better, do you agree? And I think that goes a little bit with the other, you know, just ongoing, how do we make this process better for planning commission, for the community, and, you know, development in this community.
Do we have, or does communications have anything built into the process to get feedback from citizens that are, you know, or users? I mean, folks who've been applicants and, you know, go through a part of the process and say, oh, this makes more sense than what I thought it might, or, you know, this was really challenging to deal with, or, you know, whatever the feedback might be, but to have some sort of thing in addition to planning commission and staff and so on.
I can say that I don't think there's anything formal, and, you know, with a survey, I think on an anecdotal basis, usually if we have repeat meetings and, you know, the continued comment, repeat comment, you know, that's a place where, oh, this isn't being explained quite as well. I think building envelope areas, BEAs, is an example. So, you know, staff developed a video now And we're hoping to have a place where we can better advertise that, but it's on YouTube, on the city's YouTube pages, that helps try to explain, here's how you measure BEAs, right? Here's how these percentages work, because some of the percentages are meant to add to 100%, some of them don't. And, you know, just how those area measurements, you know, are considered, I think that falls under it. So we do see, you know, we hear pain points. You know, some applicants get it and their project moves pretty quickly. Sometimes they get stuck on a particular aspect. And I think that's just another aspect of the job. Sometimes we see what we call design by review. So they bake up a concept and then they come to us and say, does this meet your code? Rather than reading the code and then designing their concept. And I think that's just a place where we want to make sure, and this is not to say that, you know, I think we're looking for ways to make it easier to engage with that code to begin with. Because if that barrier is too high, then that's the result that we get. And so I think that's just the other piece that, you know, we are looking at constantly. You know, it's hard. Every project's different. Every quality of submission can be varying, and we're always looking to make sure that that is the easiest way to get the best foot forward. So,
How often does it happen where people aren't really following the code and just hoping for you to rule on it?
it depends on degree. You know, it's how much did they understand a particular piece. Sometimes it's a misunderstanding. Sometimes it's I didn't even realize that existed. And you know, there's usually keys that they maybe didn't read our code. They'll have references to Denver standards, for instance, and vocabulary like zone lot. Zone lot is a concept that does not exist in the Golden Zoning Code. It exists in Denver. And so when we see site plans with those markers, it's usually an indication that you're just kind of copying and pasting from other codes, not necessarily ours. So there's different ways. It's hard to put a number to it. And it just depends on which. Sometimes if it's fully baked on a full concept, it gets hard to redesign that to our code. You know, I think that's where it really is the hardest. If it's just little tweaks around the edges, you know, interpretation, things like that, that's, you know, we look forward to working on those. And speaking of better applications, you know, I think, and I certainly will, you know, speak. So I think big happening. So the Junction, that's the 52-acre property that was formerly Jefferson County Open Space on the north side of the city. That has now been formally annexed into the city. So they were able to close on the property, meet certain conditions, and they'll be starting now with their actual entitlement processes with preliminary plats and other things. And you know, they're definitely continued with Excel, CDOT, and other pieces. You know, Clayworks is an ongoing development, and we expect a number of applications to come in from them this next year. I think it's also, while I didn't put it specifically in this section, I can certainly speak to it. So the state is actively has a published RFP, so that's a request for proposal. It's either a request for a proposal or RFQ, request for qualifications. But basically they are soliciting applications from the development community to partner to develop a roughly 40-acre site just to the south between the golf course and the Boys Juvenile Detention Center off of Johnson Road. Right now that's, you know, used as a recreation bike park area. Property owned by the state, however, you know, when they do select a developer, that property is zoned R1, and you know, because it's even though it's a P3, so public-private partnership, you know, it doesn't share the same pathways as, for instance, the School of Mines. So it would need to go through any golden process for subdivision, for rezoning, and you know, our processes. And so you know, we are, working through that. Staff has responded to a number of, interests and requests. You know, I think the pieces, they have an existing access off of Johnson Road. They are limited to that one access, at least to Johnson Road, or at least we're telling people to plan for only one access, because we have a charter provision that notes, you know, if you dispose of public recreation land, it goes to a vote of the people. You know, I think I'll defer ultimately to the attorneys on how they provide that, but at least a staff's initial reaction to that charter provision is any request for additional access would have to go to a vote of the people. So we'll see what ultimately developments come in, but access can limit, you know, certain size and other things. So we're getting ahead, but ultimately we don't have a formal application in. However, Planning Commission will be involved, again, with any platting. So it does have to go through, at a minimum, a preliminary and final plat. So it's a large property that goes through a major subdivision process. Those are public hearings. It would also, you know, unless somebody comes in with single household units in peripheral, it would need, you know, a rezoning, most likely for any concept they're putting forward as well. So, you know, ultimately these are quasi-judicial hearings. So, you know, and staff will have preliminary, you know, pre-application meetings when they determine who the actual partner is with those, and then, you know, there'll be neighborhood meetings and other things. So there'll definitely be engagement. We're kind of see what the RFP process produces, and that closes on March 16th. So.
Is this the one right across from the post office?
No, that's actually Excel. This is what looks to be a bit of a field.
It's like the Taco, it's like right across from the Taco Bell almost. It's like a
Oh,
weird,
yeah.
like
Yeah, yeah.
U-shaped property.
There's that funny little road with the osprey nest kind of in that little, it's like a little light post.
Maybe there's like an existing cross-country bike track in that area.
Okay,
And then the road that goes up to the school.
yeah, right, okay.
How big is that?
So about 40 acres.
Wow.
You know, if you can imagine in your mind, so going left out of the shopping center on, you know, going west on Johnson Road, it's that property, it's, you have the access point into the institution. It's just to the west of that, kind of a square-ish, rectangular-ish property.
So it's not it doesn't face on Old Golden or South Golden.
It does, no, it does not face on South Golden Road, it faces on Johnson Road.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. There's a post on Nextdoor about it if you want to see.
Oh.
So-
Cross-country practice course.
Yep, yeah, that's exactly it.
Has there been a lot of interest in the RFP?
You know, we get a number of questions about, you know, potential process, potential infrastructure, and, you know, kind of other input. Yeah, there's been interest. You know, I don't think it's going to be a single person who applies, but we'll see ultimately who maybe
That's good.
moves forward. And with that, I think we see a number of other applications coming our way this year. We know some big ones. You know, I think there's always the little ones too that, you know, sometimes take those times. Normally this doesn't end up as part of the work plan, but I think, you know, it does, you know, we do anticipate this to take up, you know, with the known ones and then the unknown ones, you know, agenda capacity, and, you know, affording our applicants the due process that they, you know, are required. So, you know, it's just something I think as we look at this, you know, it's a year that I think this warrants a place on the work plan. With that said, you know, I think I would ask, you know, and you know, invite the chair to open up the floor. Is there anything else that you see or don't see, or, you know, want, you know, added for planning, you know, for city council's kind of consideration of, you know, these are our priorities that staff didn't accurately reflect in this draft. I think this is, you know, that time, and I would ask for, if you see things that you say, no, this should be a priority for planning commission that staff didn't capture, I, you know, would welcome that discussion.
I have a question just before we get to, is there a role for planning commission? Will we see the Calvary Flats development? Is there anything that we are involved with that?
So that's the 40-unit affordable housing off of 14th Street. Ultimately, that site development plan, that form zone site plan, was approved administratively. It was posted for call-up, and it didn't get a call-up. You know, that was also, I would say, before we had the 1, 2, 3 affordable housing go process. We were able to review and approve that within 90 days of a complete application. But that was, you know, sent up, and I think they're working still through some, getting their building permit submitted. And I think, you know, ultimately council's made some decisions about, you know, funding and, you know, so other things. So it's possible we'll keep, when construction starts actively on that, we'll certainly keep that up on Guiding Golden for any construction updates. But from a planning commission role, it'd be informational at this point.
And then before we jump into other things, I just want to touch base on the development applications and review number 6. We did move our start time to 5:30, so I think we're trying to accommodate, you know, more business while also ensuring that we're getting out, because I know we all have early mornings, well, I do. And I just want to confirm, I know I think in our bylaws we have an end time unless we vote on it. Can you remind us what that is? We haven't gotten to it honestly in years. But it sounds like we might have some
With this
agendas.
agenda, we could,
Yeah.
could have.
We can definitely confirm.
I think it might be 10 p.m. unless we vote otherwise.
I was thinking 9:30, but maybe it's
It might be
10.
9:30. I can't
I
recall.
don't remember for sure, but.
Yeah.
Hold for answers.
Yeah, it might be worth revisiting that. Staff has done a really great job, you know, with our agendas, that we haven't had to go that late. I know, thinking back to Coors Tech, whenever we were originally at Clayworks, when we were originally looking at that, we had a lot of late nights, a lot. And those hearings, there went over multiple hearings. And I think we need to ensure that every single application we look at, we're giving the appropriate amount of review, no matter how long it takes. Even if we go late, and even if we have to continue the case, you know, I'm just, you know, me imparting some realism, you know, on some of the things, especially if staff feels like this is something that's, you know, facing us in this coming year that we need to be prepared for.
Yeah.
So the board and commission manual is what has that, and it says all meetings shall adjourn no later than 10 p.m.
Okay.
or as soon thereafter as the hour may be brought to the attention of the chair.
Chair.
It's up
Except
to
that
you,
upon
Ross.
majority vote of those present at the meeting, such a meeting may be extended to 10:30. Meetings may be extended past 10:30 p.m., but only upon adoption of a motion to suspend the rules. So there you go. Unless there's some other time somewhere else in one of the other documents, but I think that's what it is.
It sounds like what I.
So that sounds like it's across the board for all boards and commissions?
Yeah.
But not all the boards and commissions start at 5:30? Like some of them start later, right?
You've given yourselves an extra hour.
Yeah, great.
Like it or not.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Are we still all comfortable with starting at 5:30?
Yes.
That seems to have worked, but.
Yeah.
I think planning commission, when we looked at making that rule change, noted that it does limit some people from maybe starting at the beginning of the meeting, and yet when you have, you know, people with obligations late into the night or families to get back to, you know, as meetings were hitting that, you know, later point, that stymies engagement at the end of the meeting. So I think it's, you know, given that you've been able to work through, and there's a number of ways that people can engage, it seems to have met a happy middle. So.
Looking forward to spending a lot of time with you guys. All right, sorry. You can.
No, that's fine. This seemed to me a pretty comprehensive view. Are there other things, though, that we want to note in this? Or clarify in terms of the description?
Nothing occurs to me, but I had a question structurally. Carl, if you could, so this, it's organized differently than last year's, and I'm not saying last year's was right or better, but I'm just curious of if there was feedback that you were getting specifically from council or between staff, and this one is more of a narrative, right? The last time you had SMART goals and a matrix, and it was organized in a way that mapped the strat plan and other things. What was why the shift in formatting and methodology?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I got an email last year telling me this is the format that we're using.
Well, that's fine.
And it might still come into that for the final council packet when this, moves on to that, from a just, this is the format, put it into this. And we can certainly put that in, and I think staff, that's part of that. This is when we plan to work on it. I think, it has some of that baked into the narratives. And if that's the format that we ultimately put this back into, that's, but, yeah.
Do we have a responsibility, or is it to be conscientious to connect the narrative to the strategic plan? I mean, that's what that.
Well, maybe just follow that link, just so everybody can, I think it's at the bottom of your letter, right? Yeah, I had the same question, which is it is a little more overt in its connections, and that could be easily added, and it wasn't necessarily an omission. My question was like, yeah, just for digesting both by council and or the public, was it a better format?
No, absolutely, and I think the other piece with the work plan, and I'll just note, so when you get into the strategic goals, some of these are council initiatives, and I think the one that has the most, there are a few that are one-to-one overlaps, right? The comprehensive plan, for instance, zoning code amendments, and then, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I think more our work, your second link, the one-to-one document, what our work plan was for 25. Not this one, the other second.
The other,
link.
okay.
Yeah, so that's the corollary to the one we just reviewed, which had, more of a matrix and connections. Again, it's pluses and minuses. I'm not lobbying for it, but it does address, like Russ's question, it is quite overt. You can look at it in a glance and understand that column 1, if you're wanting to, if your suggestion that the council could line item out some initiatives that we've elevated, that helps create the context for, why is that decision being made?
It's, yeah. I kind of like that format, just because it's kind of everything together in a place. You see the connections and so on and so on. But I'm guessing that there will be some requests to make it consistent.
And I can definitely do that. I think that I heard, and I can certainly move this back into this other format.
Yeah, I'm just looking for context. Like I say, I can see pluses and minuses both if council and or staff saw. Got any feedback of harder, easier,
It seems like the narrative you created is a really nice, simple, outward-facing tool. It tells a story, whereas the grid is more of a work plan kind of doc, and I heard that, which would be helpful for us to reference, So.
yeah,
So maybe both,
I'm open.
if it's
right.
not too much work.
No, I think that's right. Like, I've moved forward with the narrative for tonight's conversation, but, I can certainly.
Right.
Yeah, maybe once it's finalized, if council wants it in this format, that's great, but I think maybe like as an end product for us, maybe something like that.
It would not shock me if I also got an email tomorrow saying I missed the emails.
Especially since you have new council members.
That's true.
Hey, Carl, so council has mentioned that it's important to look for opportunities for attainable housing. Have you thought about, or, and I know this is a sensitive topic, but the junction and this other property, you thought about opportunities there, maybe emphasizing that a little bit more and the mix of?
Yes, no, I think, that is constantly when people talk about, especially rezonings, it's not what's in it for you, it's what's in it for the city. And I think, maintaining and achieving those visions and those goals is a key component of that. Attainable and affordable housing is very much a part of, what staff tells people. And so when the conversation comes up, we certainly emphasize that. I think the state also, they have their own goals, Prop 123 and, a number of others. And so there's no formal concepts or, this is what we're absolutely doing, but I know that is, I think, emphasized also in the state's RFQ, of what they are looking for people to consider. But absolutely it is, and we look at that also from when we get, the non-policy questions, right? And is this a pattern? Is this a trend? And I think the ones over on 24th in Illinois is, and in context, yes, it's next to the golf course, which also has some of the highest property values in the area. And so, but we do look at that and say, is this still performing to our expectations? And we have those internal conversations as well as a staff. But, we certainly, we have those. So.
Maybe not to add to the work plan specifically, but as time allows, and as staff time allows, if you could provide us some updates on the legislative session. This looks like it might be a very active one, potentially for land use items, with one bill already being introduced.
That's a good idea.
Obviously, like at the end when we know for a fact what's gonna be impacting local governments, but even, along the way, it's kind of interesting to follow along, if you have time, understanding that it sounds like you've got a big workload, and so will we.
No, I think that's also, as staff and planning commission have talked about, and we talked about it and then I promptly stopped doing it, but the emails also in providing that space and, here's the things that we've talked about, here's where they're at, and just doing a better job to keep things either on the radar or where they are, if we want to use the oven, where they are in the baking process. And I think having updates on the state legislative is certainly fits within that. So I will commit to you that I will get better to utilize that for those updates.
Good suggestion, thank you. Other comments, thoughts, any glaring things that somehow we missed in this pretty comprehensive list?
I think it's pretty comprehensive.
It's good.
Just, is, I guess, our new chair, presuming it's Ross, is gonna be presenting this to council, I believe, or at least present, I think it's a March
Yes.
hearing or study session that they have.
Yep,
Okay.
that's exactly it. So we'll have the formal, and I think that's a great point just to remind on some of our member process. So we will need new elections, and if we don't get regular business, I'll just put one on the agenda so that we can open it up, have that formal election process. So chair, vice chair. I reviewed our bylaws. Mark Haran, Commissioner Haran, is now a full member, so there's no additional
Wow, thank you.
steps that need to be taken. So you'll fill in for now council member Kurzinski, and then you are eligible for 2 full terms in addition to completing the former chair's term.
You stuck with us
Lucky,
forever.
lucky.
That's great.
Forever. The other.
Unless I get booted out early, right?
You know, I think no one is coming up on their second full term, so we don't have any commissioners term limited. And I would invite,
Well, not, well, in like
What
2
you-
years,
you've got
but
Well,
I'm
2 years,
it's my
yeah,
last.
4 years.
but so this year,
Okay, this year.
2026, we do have terms ending, but no one's second term is ending this year, so you're welcome to reapply. And, you know, I think we have a very strong commission, and, you know, I hope I get to work with all of you, you know, into the next year, but I'll provide updates on dates and applications in that process, so when they become open. And I'll provide kind of the full, where people stand. You know, I think Commissioner Colbert wasn't here tonight, but, you know, I think she was filling in for a partial term. Therefore, you know, she is eligible for 2 more full terms. And so, you know, as those terms come up, I'll provide those as the follow-up.
Sorry, going back to, just occurs to me as this work plan, it seems like after, it could be a tool at the chair's discretion to build this out after council approves it, like others have suggested. You know, topic 1 has, you know, 1A, 1B, 1C could be built out
Mhm.
after high-level buy-in and actually provide a clearer, more granular idea about, you know, unpacking all those things that we know are baked into these high-level things. It seems like it could be a helpful document to guide throughout the year if we spend some time after the approval
What,
to build those out.
what this means really.
Yeah, what are the top 4 things in each category that, and some are more circumstantial, you know, a specific case won't have that, but some of these high-level ones, you know, 1, 3, well, 5, you know, so more than half of them probably have 4 subsections in them, but we've already identified in tonight's discussion, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's also, like, we can certainly work, you know, with staff on the engagement plan, because on the form-based code, that will be tied with, you know, I think parallel with the historic preservation guidelines, and then also there's a number of things that will help those be robust conversations, and so we can certainly work with the chair to review that and say, is this timing, you know, working with your expectations?
I have a question, I guess, sort of follow-up to that. After we talked last time, it occurred to me that the form-based discussion might be a good time to, or a good topic to really look at some way to formally engage with the Historic Preservation Board, whether it's a joint meeting, whether it's you know, if there's enough conversation to do a subcommittee, you know, kind of thing like we did on the sustainability stuff. That model, you know, having participated in, I found really productive. So I was curious as to whether that resonates with other people as well.
I think that's a great
Nodding
idea.
heads.
Great idea.
Yeah, I think it's connecting the dots here there's the last column in the work plan has connection with other boards. So to the extent that,
Yeah.
a sentence is added, maybe to number 1 to capture that, I think would be appropriate if everybody is seeing it the same way.
Well, I think the HPB is working on updating their, I don't know what you want to call it, not regulations, or are they? And how could we tie into that and make sure that we're in alignment and we understand what their goals are and vice versa, and make sure that it's complementary and we're working together.
Yep.
So those would be the historic preservation guidelines And then also, you know, they're doing context statements for the districts and other things, so that's that. And I think there is a zoning component as part of that conversation, especially when looking at like the mostly preserved structure standards. And is that a way, like we have an example where they actually refaced their front, but to make it more historic, and therefore wrote themselves out of the mostly preserved struct. So is there some ways that when dealing with historic structures that we could, you know, have the zoning code help and not hinder those goals? And I think that's a conversation that would definitely be valuable between the two commissions,
And they,
the commission and the board.
and they are presumably doing the same task in terms of what their work plan for 26 is, so where that overlaps or intersects or whatever.
So,
So does that, have we provided feedback that's helpful for you in terms of, you know, massaging these some, and then, you know, the question of presentation, whether, you know, certainly whatever council wants, plus knowing or having heard that, you know, something that's a little more chart oriented, at least that's what I heard, we thought might be helpful for us in terms of our working with it. And Kevin's suggestion of really parceling out, or not parceling out, but detailing out what's, what are the real tasks that go with these goals and general statements.
you certainly make those, and, you know, I heard just some overall tweaks to the narratives and addressing some of the work that's gone into these, especially the longer efforts and ongoing ones, so.
Okay. Thank you.
That was great.
I think
Thank
that's
you.
helpful, and glad that it's helpful to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to meet tonight. You know, like I said, I wanted to make sure that this had the space. I know we kind of said, maybe we won't be meeting in, you know, the second meeting in January, but I appreciate you making the time and being here, because I think this helps give this the full breadth that it needed, and then also, you know, gives that space for the comp plan conversation for that first meeting. And then, you know, we'll see where our applicants fall when they can get those things baked up fully for notice and all those other things. So thank you for that.
So, just in terms of thinking about the next couple of weeks, when the comp plan gets back from folks, you'll let us know when it's up. And we'll have a study session in 2 weeks, with the topic being updated discussion of the comp plan, with the understanding that we're gonna take the time that we feel is necessary and raise the questions that we feel are necessary for that process to continue, but not necessarily have a artificial date about completion. But that's what we'll do in the meeting on the 4th. And then, based on that conversation, have some idea of kind of, you know, then what the next step is. And you think that probably by the 18th, that maybe have an application or two that might be ready for us to look at.
We expect something as, you know, will be for regular business on the 18th. And like I said, I think from our study session on the comp plan, we'd be looking at, you know, a go, no-go decision, depending. And if it's a no-go, then that's, you know, planning commission's prerogative and say, no, bring this back for another round, or if there's, we are confident that based on the feedback and, changes that you can make those, generally non-substantive, just, tweaks around the edges, but we're comfortable to, bring this forward as a public hearing, conversation. I think that's where we're looking, for planning commission's feedback from that study session. And then we'll figure out agenda capacity and, how much time do we think, given the extensive conversations, would we double book a night with the comp plan and something else? We'll take a look at that because, we don't want to overbook it and then, something gives either from a due process perspective or from a public engagement on the community vision perspective. So, I think that's where we'll shuffle around and see what works to move things around. So, if there's time and capacity for both, but I think that's a component that we'd look at after the next study session on the comp plan. So,
I will not be here on the 18th, just heads up.
okay.
Are you, would it be an option to be online or just not available?
I'll be on a ski trip in Montana.
No,
So
it's not.
probably,
No, no.
probably not online.
That's the answer.
Okay.
Isn't that, is that right after President's Day?
Yes. Yeah, it's the Wednesday after President's Day.
I might be out of town too.
We will certainly take attendance into account as well. So quorums matter, and
Yeah.
if we do need, we'll take a look just to manage expectations and timelines
So I think
and doneness.
each of us could kind of look at that in terms, when we get together on the 4th,
Mhm.
kind of know what we're going to.
What's, quorum is 5, quorum is 6.
What was
Quorum
that?
is 5 people or 6 people?
4 actually. Yeah, quorum is 4. However, if we're adopting, something like the comp plan, we'd certainly want, the as many as possible.
Do we have in our bylaws, or do we even have bylaws anymore since we have the standardized boards and commissions? So the reason why I'm asking is, at least in the jurisdiction that I work for a comp plan amendment or to adopt a comprehensive plan, it's required to have all 7 members of the planning commission present. And then, I don't know if that's the same for us, that's why I was asking.
Good question.
I don't know, we'll have to look and look. I don't know if there's anything like that. We have a supplemental rules.
Yeah.
So bylaws by any other name, I guess.
Okay.
But,
Those basically became what replaced the bylaws.
Yeah.
Was those supplemental rules and procedure that addended the ones adopted by council for and we can certainly, as we look to schedule the public hearing, we'll double confirm commissioner attendance. My initial guess is that because the jurisdiction you refer to is statutory.
Sure, yep.
That's state law that states that, whereas as a home rule, if we don't have anything that doesn't, require it, then it goes to just our default quorum.
But we
And,
can
and or our desire to
And planning commission's
have a more
preference, but that's.
robust discussion.
Good point,
about
right? I mean,
Like we can't kick the can.
yeah, that one person is gonna be here each meeting for like the next 3 months.
But,
Great.
right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for putting this together.